welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we're taking a look at the mysterious 24-volt new tools that have popped up on the Lowe's website. What are they? Where did they come from? And what does this mean for the future? Sit back, grab a drink, and let's have a little discussion about this. So if you've been to the Lowe's website and you've searched for the phrase 24-volt, you may see a screen that looks something like this. Coming soon, coming soon, coming soon. There's no brand name on it. And you go, well, what is that? I know what your first instinct is, well, 24 volt. There's only one line, notably, at Lowe's. That's 24 volt, and that's Kobalt. So clearly this must be Kobalt tools that are coming. Yay, more Kobalt tools. I think there's more to it than that, and that's why we need to have a little discussion today. So, little disclaimer here. This video contains speculative information, my commentary and criticism of the situation, and all this is compiled from publicly available sources, being used under fair use. And all these details that I find are subject to change, are speculative, and could be wildly wrong. There's no guarantee that what I'm saying is right. I'm just some guy on the internet trying to research this as best as I can, but I could be completely wrong. And in some cases, I kind of hope I'm wrong, but that's just what it is. So with that out of the way, let's keep going. So let's talk about Kobalt. Think about 24-volt tools. We got to talk about Kobalt. So Kobalt is a brand that is owned by Lowe's, really Lowe's of North Carolina. That's their corporate headquarters. The brand originated in 1998 for toolboxes and tool storage, and has been expanded on a wide range of products. Recently, we've seen electrical and plumbing products added to the mix besides hand tools. And so Kobalt is owned by Lowe's. But Lowe's is a retail store. They don't actually manufacture tools. They sell tools. They don't make them. So Kobalt, to phrase it differently, is a private label. And so Lowe's has to work out manufacturers to produce products branded with Kobalt products and Kobalt colors. But working this in reverse, these manufacturers don't have to be exclusive to Lowe's or Kobalt and are free to produce many other products under various names for other brands and perhaps other manufacturers. And so in this case, the big one we're going to be talking about most notably is Chervon. Chervon publicly owns, if you will, the brands Ego, Skill, Flex, Extron, Skill Saw, Hammerhead, Calmudra, and Devon. Just to get this out of the way, when it comes to Kobalt tools at Lowe's, if you go in the outdoor power equipment section, you may find their 40 and 80 volt tools, which are produced by Greenworks, which is owned by Globe Tools, which actually has some interest in it by Steel, the chainsaw manufacturer. And that's completely separate from the 24-volt tools that you find from Chervon or sold under the Ego or Skill name at Lowe's. But today, we're going to be focusing on this red square here, Flex Tools, das Original. So the history of Flex Tools, this is kind of one of the missing brands in that portfolio that we don't see in the U.S. here. In 1922, they were founded in Germany. And they made, this is probably their most notable achievement, the first high-speed angle grinder that's akin to what we know today in around 1954. 40-some years later, in 1997, they launched their long-reach electric drywall sander, so you could sand a drywall ceiling without needing a ladder or scaffolding. They call it their Giraffe product. Now, where it gets interesting is in the mid-1990s, they merged or were acquired by Porter Cable / Pentair. But then Pentair eventually sold their tool division completely to Black & Decker in 2004. And then 2010, Black & Decker merged with Stanley to become Stanley Black & Decker, the company that we know today, in 2010. And then 3 years later in 2013, Stanley Black & Decker sells the Flex brand to Chervon. Flex, as I understand it, still has offices in Germany, but is owned by Chervon, the Chinese corporation. which has U.S. headquarters in, I believe, Naperville, Illinois. But Chervon is a global tool conglomerate, as we'll talk a little bit more later. And so that's the brief history of Flex. But there's a chance you might have interacted with a Flex tool before or seen it in a catalog, that based on at least my opinion here and my market research, that I think these two Porter cable products from a few years back likely had some design influence from that integration between Flex, Pentair, and Porter cable, notably the 7800 drywall sander and the accompanying dust vacuum that goes with it. That those look remarkably similar to other Flex products that we see today and have been produced in the past. So there's a chance in the US, maybe you've used what I think might have been a Flex tool. So since 2013, and that's when Stanley Black & Decker sold the brand to Chervon, we've seen the drywall sander and that vacuum I just showed you largely phased out. And their production, or Flex's tools production and sale of tools in the U.S., has, in my opinion, been largely limited to angle grinders, sanders, specialty cutting tools, polishers, a few cordless lights for auto detailing, and vacuums. So basically, it's a specialty products line where they've got their foot in the U.S., but as far as I can tell, there's not been any market segment really cornered by Flex. The most likely corner would be auto detailing, and that's about it. But once you get outside the US, you get over to Europe, you'll find that the line of Flex tools has a full-fledged line of other tools, from everything from mud mixers, 3/4-inch impact wrenches, drills, jigsaws, circular saws, recip saws. And what I think is interesting here, you look at that recip saw, look underneath that, take a look at that box, and the first thing I see there is I go, wow, that looks a lot like the Bosch L-Box. Very interesting that looks so similar to the Bosch L-Box. You know, going back to what I said about manufacturers sharing items and manufacturing duties across lines, I think there's something of interest there that piques my attention. And so we know Chervon is likely, or has been confirmed on some of these, to manufacture certain products under certain labels or for other brands. So first of all, we got Masterforce, the house brand at Menards, kind of like what Kobalt is to Lowe's, Masterforce is to Menards. And Chervon produces their Flex Power 20-volt tools. You also have Bauer over at Harbor Freight, along with a sister brand, Earthquake, that I think has some connection to Chervon. Kobalt, we know that to be true. Rigid, we know that Chervon's made some radios and some lasers for Rigid. Speculation, Sun Joe and Snow Joe and their 24-volt line, I think may have some resemblance or connection to Chervon. I could be completely wrong on some of these. Einhell, I think, may have some connection to Flex, another German brand that's not really in the U.S., but has at least made some attempt, and they're paired up with Snow Joe and Sun Joe in terms of their marketing. We've got Sears Craftsman, emphasis on the Sears part. I know Chervon manufactured some of the C3 tools, a very, very, very small number, and some of the other tools for Sears Craftsman before Stanley Black & Decker bought the Craftsman brand. We've got Bosch. There's a handful of tools, like I just showed with that L-Box, that I strongly suspect there's some integration one way or another between Chervon and Bosch. Hyper Tough at Walmart, and Newmaster, another esoteric brand. And so all these on the screen, either I can confirm some of them, and others I just have some strong suspicion, but again, I could be wrong as having some connection to Chervon. Get any other connections that you believe are connected to Chervon, or ones that you think I'm wrong on, put in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. So now let's take a look over inside Lowe's and see what's going on in their power tool section. So first of all, we see DeWalt tools, but they are two lines. There's the 12 and the 20 volt max line. Now the 12 volt line isn't that expansive, but it's there. And then there's the Metabo Hitachi Power Tool line, or HPT, in the 18-volt flavor. We've got Skill's 12-volt max line in store. Now, I know their 20-volt max line is available online, but at least so far, I've not seen it in any of the Lowe's that I've been to in a handful of states. We got the Kobalt line, obviously owned by Lowe's, that we can find at Lowe's, only in the 24-volt max variety. We've got the Stanley Black & Decker owned Craftsman at 20 volt. But if you look at their V20 chargers, there is a passing reference of a V20 line that hasn't materialized yet printed on those chargers. So that remains to be seen what's going to happen with that. And then we've got Bosch. Also of note, just to round out the portfolio here, that you may still find some Black & Decker and Porter cable tools floating around at Lowe's. As far as I can tell, these are largely being phased out. And the line is significantly very narrow, incomplete, essentially online only, but you still may find a handful of these products here and there. And I suspect you may see some the Black & Decker branded products pop up around Christmas or other holiday times for budget-minded tool gifts from a brand that people recognize. But since those are going away, let me take those off the screen from you. And now let's focus on these other brands here, and let's look at some connection. So DeWalt and Craftsman, that's really the same company. Stanley Black & Decker owns both brands. Craftsman was acquired from Sears a few years ago for a hefty chunk of money. And so those two are connected. But then playing this dancing game, we also have Skill and Kobalt are both produced by Chervon. So this portfolio of brands is a little bit smaller than what it may lead you to believe at first glance in terms of, well, who's behind them, who's making them, and who's designing them and everything else that goes with it. So go over to the outdoor power equipment section at Lowe's, and you'll see a portfolio of brands that looks something like this in store. And again, there's more you can find online than what you can find in store. So at the bottom here, we got Ariens, which so far has only really been snow blowers, but they make more than that. We got Husqvarna, Skill, Craftsman, Kobalt, and Ego. Ego being the most new brand to Lowe's that I'm aware of, and probably the most noteworthy in the last year whenever that shifted exclusive from the Home Depot, or maybe mostly exclusive, because I know you can buy Ego at Ace Hardware as well, but I think Ego is clearly the flagship brand, at least on the electric side, over at Lowe's. But then we make some more connections here, and we see that the Skill, Kobalt, and Ego lines are all actually produced by Chervon. Now, I've got Kobalt boxed halfway over because of the 40 and 80 volt lines that are the Greenworks tool production. Now, I'm not convinced that the future of those tools lines are very strong because of the inclusion of Ego and Chervon's perceived desire to dominate OPE at Lowe's, but we'll see. I know there's a lot of people committed to those other lines. We've seen the 80 volt line. I think that's clearly an endangered species, since that's moved online only. The 40 volt line might stand a fighting chance for a little bit longer. I mean, we did see the 40 volt, we'll call it Power Wheels car come out in Christmas 2020 as a fun gift there. So maybe there's some life left there in that lineup, which is not a Chervon line for that 40 volt side. So now let's go across town and go over to Home Depot. Just for comparison, Home Depot has 5 major brands in store. We've got DeWalt with their 20 volt max line. They don't have the 12 volt line there. Maybe I should have listed here the Flex Volt line, but because of the way Flex Volt and 20 volt interact, I didn't list it separately. That's, if you get other thoughts, put that down below on that one. That's a little bit more complicated. Then we got Rigid's 18 volt line. We've got Milwaukee's 12 and 18 volt line, both of which are fairly expansive and certainly count for 2 points here for the number of lineups that we see at Home Depot. We've got Ryobi's 18 volt line. I think Ryobi has largely abandoned their 12 volt line years ago, as well as Rigid. I mean, they might still have one left, if that. And then we've got Makita with their LXT 18 volt line and their relatively new 12 volt CXT line, taking up space at the Home Depot. So you can see here at the Home Depot, we've got 5 brands, if you will, and 7 lineups of tools. And there were 7 lineups over at Lowe's. So things are roughly equal, give or take. But, one of the most interesting things I see is we got DeWalt is the only brand in common between both of these stores, which I think probably gives way to some level of market domination. But you can find Milwaukee at other stores besides Home Depot. Ace Hardware is one that comes to mind. And I've seen them at some other farm and agricultural type stores that you can find Milwaukee products at too. And other independent tool distributors will carry it as well. But then Ryobi, Ridgid, and Milwaukee are all owned by, or at least, let me rephrase this, produced by TTI. And I say that because Ridgid is a brand owned by Emerson and is under license by TTI, but it's effectively just a rebranding of their AEG brand that they use in Europe. So take that as you wish. Kind of the same, kind of different, but they're all produced by TTI. So what this brings us to really is there is a power tool big 3 going on in the background. None of these brands necessarily compete up front as these brands because they're really a portfolio of sub-brands. So the first one here is we got Chervon, then we got Stanley Black & Decker, and TTI in no particular order. And these 3 control a significant portfolio of the North American power tool market. And all these companies have additional brands I haven't talked about. I mean, Stanley Black & Decker also has Facom in Europe, Mac Tools in the U.S., Proto, Stanley, and more. TTI has more, and I went through most of Chervon's brands as well earlier. And so within each of these 3 big players in power tool brands, there's been a very consistent theme in terms of how they want to divide up the market from high end to low end so that one brand doesn't really cannibalize another brand and that there's some strategic market positioning for sectors. So if we just look at the general construction household tool brands, I'm going to take each of these big 3 and break down what I think are largely their gold, silver, and bronze level brands, not counting certain specialty brands. So for Stanley Black & Decker, let's toss out Mac and Proto and set those aside, since those are a little more niche brands. And then checking in at the bottom with the bronze medal, I'm going to go ahead and put Black & Decker here. I think that brand is going to survive, even if it's a much, much smaller portfolio. People recognize the Black & Decker brand. It's their budget economy line that's been around for decades and decades. And then number 2, we've got the Craftsman line, which, given how much money Stanley Black & Decker paid a few years ago, they have every reason in the world to be promoting and building up the Craftsman line. And we've even seen the Craftsman line cannibalize and rebadge a handful of the number 1 or the gold medal brand from Stanley Black & Decker, and that's DeWalt. And I think hands down, you can possibly see why the fact that DeWalt is in both Lowe's and the Home Depot goes a long way, and many other independent retail channels for that matter, goes a long way for the market domination of DeWalt tools. That the black and gold of DeWalt is ubiquitous and recognizable on job sites everywhere. That's probably the first brand that comes to mind. And we've seen some Craftsman tools borrow from DeWalt. Notably missing here at one point, the number 2 line here was Porter Cable, but Porter Cable has been through so many changes and is basically defunct now. And all but name only, in my opinion. And given how much money Stanley Black & Decker has put into Craftsman, I've got no reason to believe that Craftsman's going to not be propped up at the number 2 spot. But I think they're going to be careful not to cannibalize the profits of all the tradesmen that pay into that DeWalt line and pay for that gold collar drill and other tools, and the profit margins that come from that are to be protected, that keep that at the gold standard at the top of the platform here. So let's move over to TTI. So TTI, I think, is a little more clear-cut in North America for where all 3 of these brands stand. At the bottom, we've got Ryobi. Particularly since they moved from their blue to their green tools, they've really stepped up their game and moved up market. But I think they're definitely at the bronze medal level here. And then stepping up, we've got Ridgid, which has been expanding quite a bit over the last year. And for those of you outside the North America, just replace the name Rigid with AEG, and you'll get the idea. And then at the top of the podium comes Milwaukee. That Milwaukee is hands down the premium brand of TTI. And I think it's been interesting over the last few weeks in March of 2021, where we've seen some changes to the Rigid brand that, in my opinion, are likely being made, just my commentary, to more clearly differentiate Rigid from market confusion with Milwaukee. And so there is no market cannibalization between the two brands to clearly position Rigid down market from Milwaukee, but hopefully up market from Ryobi. Could be completely wrong on that, but that's just my take on that situation, which is a whole different conversation. So now going over to Chervon, bringing this full circle here. At the number 3 end, we've got Skill, which I think, because of it being previously owned by Bosch and being very clearly associated with a low-level brand that competed with Black & Decker at that low end of the market, while Chervon has definitely moved it up market, I think there's a ways for it to go in terms of its brand reputation. Now, I know there's Skill Saw, which is a premium offering, but because Skill Saw is not an across-the-board tool brand, I really can't fairly consider them here in this conversation with it. But understand Skill and Skill Saw should be treated a little bit differently, just to be fair. Then moving up market, we've got Kobalt, looking at Lowe's, although I think in Menards you could replace Kobalt here with Masterforce. But since Lowe's is a much larger national retailer than Menards, clearly the number 2 here has to be Kobalt, which leaves a big wide open stage here on the platform for what's going to be number 1. Well, Skill does have both a brushed and a brushless line in their newly revamped lineup. And we've seen at Menards where they have basically rebranded the brushless Skill line as Masterforce and kept the low-end Skill brushed line just as Skill as their bottom brand at Menards. But what's going to be number 1? That we saw Stanley Black & Decker had a brand that was available for sale at a variety of retail stores. Kobalt clearly can't be that because of its relationship with Lowe's. And if you're Chervon, I think you're going to be looking for ways to be found to get a new brand as a premium brand to go head-to-head for those premium dollars that you can get into multiple retail channels. And that's where I believe Flex fits in the picture. So now let's rearrange these top 3 brands from these top 3 manufacturers in a little different order. That we've got Ryobi, Rigid, and Kobalt are all exclusive to big box centers. Ryobi and Rigid exclusive to Home Depot. Kobalt exclusive to Lowe's. But then on the other side of the red line, we've got Skill, Craftsman, Black & Decker, DeWalt, and Milwaukee that you can find at multiple stores. And like I mentioned earlier with DeWalt, you can get that both at Home Depot, Lowe's, and other independent stores. I think that goes a long way. Craftsman can be picked up at Lowe's, Amazon, and at Ace Hardware, among others. Milwaukee, independent dealers, and Home Depot. Black & Decker, I think that's is across the board. I'm not sure there's any restrictions on that. And Skill, they've got the 12-volt line of Skill into Lowe's. We've seen the 20-volt line, at least their brushed line, labeled as Skill and Menards. And we're seeing it also on Amazon. And so lots of non-exclusive deals there. And so I think adding Flex to that line, maybe even trying to weasel Flex into Home Depot would go a long way for increasing the presence of Chervon tools amongst the other big 3 brands in terms of their ability to corner the market and compete head-to-head with Milwaukee and DeWalt. And so, in my opinion, I think Flex Tools fills a missing retail void for Chervon of trying to get their tools into as many retail channels as possible. And so the current retail channels that you can find Flex Tools in are Acme Tools online, CPO outlets, Amazon, independent tool dealers such as the Chemical Guys, and Lowe's. You can already buy corded Flex Tools through Lowe's.com. You're not going to find them in stores, but they're available online, along with many other brands as well that you don't find online. And so you can see that the groundwork is there because that relationship already with Lowe's and Flex as probably the largest national brick and mortar retailer store that, that if you're Chervon, you're going to use whatever angle you can to get your brand into as many stores as possible. And if you're Lowe's, we've really seen them expand the OPE to compete head-to-head against Home Depot. That their CEO has really been moving Lowe's forward in the last couple of years to make Lowe's the destination for high-end power tools. So before we go too far into this, let's talk about 24 versus 18 volts. There's a little quick aside here I think is important here. In the U.S. at least, I can't speak for any other place, Milwaukee Tool, obviously a TTI company, has a patent on 18-volt lithium-ion battery technology. Whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter. They've got several key patents that they are known to litigate on. They notably had some litigation with Snap-on Tools recently. Got another video on that. I'll put a card up in the corner for that. But then, at least in my opinion, this 24-volt setup here with the extra cell in the battery, which may make it a little larger and clunkier than an 18 or 20-volt max, whatever you want to call it, may be an end run on paying royalties to a competitor, that being Milwaukee or TTI, and saving a few dollars that either Chervon can put back in their own pocket or knock off of prices to make their tools more price competitive with other brands. So it's kind of a win-win on that end, potentially, with the exception of adding the extra cell to the battery, which may add some bulk. But I think we've seen over the last year with these XTR tools that, and the Kobalt line as a whole, that, consumers are not that adverse to it. And it competes well head-to-head with 20-volt tools in Lowe's stores as it is. So really, let's come back to this shot we looked at before of these coming soon, and what is this graphic supposed to mean? Well, we've got some clues. If we click on one of these and we look at their their model number, we'll see all the model numbers for these coming soon tools are model number FX something, something, something. But for Kobalt tool fans, every single model of Kobalt 24-volt tool begins with the letter K. This does not begin with K. FX goes with the brand Flex. So I'm beginning to see some parallels here. Now, while it's clear to me that someone went through and replaced all these Flex tool images with coming soon images, I'm very skeptical that someone went through all of the Flex tool listings on Lowe's.com and completely upended the specs with false, misleading information. Maybe they did. Maybe they're just trying to catch people like me who have been scouring their website looking for new tools coming out. Maybe. I'm doubtful of it, but they could have. And maybe the joke's on me and they get the last laugh. Because if all these turned into Kobalt tools, that would make me happy personally, but I'm not sure that actually does anything to help Chervon. And so, like I just mentioned briefly, there were a number of Flex tool images on those tool pages that I was able to grab when they first came out. And so we can get a little glimpse at what's behind those black squares. So this whole Flex line has a variety of tools, many of which look familiar and similar to existing Kobalt tools, but a little differently, all with a 24-volt branding on it, very clearly seen in this 12 amp hour battery. And so between saws and drills and grinders, rotary hammers, vacuums, jigsaws, batteries, chargers, mud mixers, grinders, they've got a handful of tools that were at least leaked online on Lowe's.com before they replaced them with those black squares, including some drywall tools. Almost all of these have, so far, Kobalt analogs, with the exception of that cordless mud mixer. There's a Kobalt corded mud mixer that looks similar to that, that was announced a while back. But as far as a cordless one, not yet. And so if we take that page that we saw before and we replace it with the images that should have been there, this is what it would look like. And I think this largely makes sense with the exception of that battery charger for $149. I'm not quite sure that makes any sense. So maybe there's something wrong there. But for the other ones here, I think the price makes sense. And in these combo kits, I'm happy to see, a pair of batteries rather than just one battery. So one of my complaint with the Kobalt tool kits, that two batteries is the way to get through it. But because Kobalt batteries are so cheap, I think they get a pass on that. But here, what I think is interesting in terms of batteries, there's this massive 12 amp hour battery. Like, that makes me think there's a lot more to come for potential new tools here. You know, could there be a cordless shop vac? Just speculating here, that would build on that, would use a 12 amp hour battery or something else more powerful that needs extra runtime. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of possibilities here. So what do we know so far? We know that battery capacities are checking in at 2.5, 5, 8, and 12 amp hours. From what I can tell, looking at the battery terminals, it's not going to be compatible with Kobalt 24-volt batteries, unfortunately. And the current 18-volt, very limited line of detailing tools do not appear to have 24-volt counterparts, and they will likely be incompatible, which I know is a little sad for those that have it, but it's such a niche item that, at least in the short term, that's probably fine. There might be some long-term transition plan to begin adding those tools into a 24-volt lineup. Only time will tell in the future for what that holds. The warranty is likely to be a 5-year limited warranty, but they're asking that people have to register their tool. Makes me think of the rigid lifetime service agreement. And so far, I know every Kobalt fan's going to ask, are there any signs of cordless nailers? And the sad answer is no, not yet. We'd all love to see that. And if you haven't seen my Christmas video that kind of makes fun of that, I'll put a card up in the corner on that. Go check that out, making fun of the Kobalt 24-volt nailer situation, or lack thereof. That's all I want for Christmas. As well as the final piece here, this isn't actually launched yet. We know that the global issues in 2020 have created some significant supply chain issues for a variety of manufacturers around the globe. And so what the timetable on this is, I don't know. The next obvious one on the US calendar is Father's Day, but I could be completely wrong on that. They could begin to drop here and there like the XTR tools did a year ago, before they were generally available on the website and otherwise acknowledged with specs and everything else on Lowe's.com. So maybe we'll see a slow launch of these tools, a little bit of a quiet launch, if you will. Maybe we'll see something bigger closer to Father's Day, or maybe after. I think some of this is probably going to depend on global supply chain issues and the like. I don't know. We'll see. And the final issue that I question is, so far, this lineup looks interesting but small. Most other brands have much larger lineups, and I think investing in a lineup is both about the existing tools that are out there and what's to come that may meet your future tool needs. And a small lineup that is not fully complete doesn't quite invite the same confidence as you see from the posters from whether it's DeWalt or it's Makita or Milwaukee that advertise the sheer size and expansiveness of their lineup, or even Ryobi. Now, Kobalt's been doing a lot to expand their lineup lately of the 24-volt tools, and 2020 has been largely the year of Kobalt, putting out so many new tools that I hope they keep up that pace. Which makes me wonder about the future of Kobalt tools in the 24-volt variety. In my opinion, I think the outdoor power equipment in that area is probably safe. There's probably going to be some updates, but I don't see Kobalt cannibalizing Ego, particularly because of the notable differences in their battery form factors. But what I do think may be uncertain is what's the future for new XTR tools. In my opinion, the XTR launch a year ago was a soft test for whether or not to bring flex tools to the market in the US or not. Would the US be excited about high-performance 24-volt tools? Or is there clearly still a lock between Milwaukee and DeWalt? And is there a room to squeeze in a new brand? I'm guessing the interpretation of that data was probably yes, that people were excited about the power and the price of the XTR tools. But in terms of a brand management standpoint, how do you position the new tools to not compete and steal market share from other tools? That I don't know. And so what's the future for new XTR tools? I don't know. And that's the one piece that pains me here, because I want to see more XTR tools. I want to see Kobalt tools get more powerful. But would that be cannibalizing from Flex? I don't know. But I do think it's likely that Kobalt will miss out on specialty tools that will be exclusive to the Flex line. Like one that I think stands out to me would be a cordless solution for drywall sanding. If you had a cordless giraffe sander and cordless dust collector that went with it that might use that 12 amp hour battery, I doubt we'd see that in a Kobalt lineup. That's also probably not a homeowner grade tool that you would see in a line from, say, Ryobi or otherwise. That's a very specialty niche tool, just like many of the other Flex tools. I think I got some other ones for like stone countertop cutting that would likely be used as a professional countertop cutter. That, again, not really mainstream tools, but we've seen other brands like Milwaukee and Makita have cordless solutions for things that are very, very trade specific, that are not going to flow into other tool brands because they're so specific. And I suspect we'll see the same thing with the Flex line here. And so with that, I've shared a bunch of my thoughts on the Flex tool situation. I'm curious if you got any other thoughts or comments, put it down below. Other predictions, I'd love to hear them. If you think I'm completely wrong, by no means tell me I'm wrong. I want to hear your ideas. I'm excited to see what the future holds with these tools, when they're going to launch and how they're going to compete, and what the future holds for everything. I get excited about stuff like this, and I hope you guys do too. If you get excited about this, please give it a thumbs up. Click the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Bye.